My name is Basil Siokos, and I'm the Director of Programming for Doc NYC. I'm happy to be joined right now with filmmaker Elizabeth Lowe to discuss her film Stray. Elizabeth, welcome, and thanks for being part of Doc NYC.
Hi, thank you, Basil. It's such an honor to be part of your lineup.
I have to start with the basic question. What inspired Stray? I love the film, and I'm just curious what made you decide you're going to run around the streets of Istanbul to follow stray dogs?
Yeah, of course. It came from a really personal place. Obviously, I love dogs, and I had a childhood dog growing up who passed away. And I remember at the time of his passing, I felt this need to sort of like suppress my grief because I could feel that it wasn't, the same as a family member dying, or I was told by society that this was not the case. And I just remember thinking that, an external politics that defined him as lesser was somehow corrupting and affecting how my heart was allowed to respond to his passing. And I think, and my grief has changed over the years. And I think that flux, that shift of his status changing in my mind made me fascinated with the idea of, fascinated with the idea of what it means for the status of a being to change. And when I came across, so I looked at different cultural contexts where stray dogs exist. And because to me, stray dogs kind of exist at the lowest part of a sort of a hierarchy rung of a human society or an urban fabric. And when I came across Turkey, I realized that they were fully incorporated into society in this way that was completely foreign to me. And I went there and was really struck by the way they exist with stray dogs, not through a paradigm of ownership, and that dogs are allowed to have agency, and that people fought for their right to exist on the streets. And so the film really is this assertion by putting, Zeytin's face, having her fill the screen and to take up, 70 minutes of your time. It's really this assertion that no matter what your species is, that you have some kind of value and you have agency in your life, in the case of these stray dogs in Turkey.
And how much did the project change from its initial conception to what we see now?
Yeah, I mean, it changed a lot. So originally, the idea was to follow dogs in different countries. Like Turkey was one, and maybe China, and another place would have been another. But I think after we met Zeytin, because she was so charismatic, and because Turkey itself was already such a diverse place, we went to different cities in Turkey. And originally, we had limited it from different countries now to different cities in Turkey. And finally, it just became Zeytin and her two companions. I think narratively, to get over that hump, to get audiences to empathize with a dog, they had to find her recognizable, and you had to find yourself attached to the single dog's journey. And there's also something, I think, really radical about the idea of treating a dog protagonist in the same way that you do a human one in a drama. And so in the end, it became her story and her relationship with these boys who live on the streets with her.
Right. And I mean, you just said after you met Zeytin. So how did you meet Zeytin? Did somebody, did you ask people about stray dogs in the neighborhood? Did you just run into her? How did it work?
No, we had gone on a scouting trip in 2017 where we had this idea okay, Turkey is going through all this change. There's the rise of authoritarianism, they're in the wake of terrorist attacks, and there's this influx of refugees. And we tried to sort of produce it from this top-down way where these were the issues, and we try to find dogs around that. But we found that somehow the sample footage, it didn't feel authentic. And so the next time we went back, which is the time that we met Zeytin in 2018, we had no plans, no one to meet. We were just gonna be open to who we met, what dogs we met on the street. And one day we were in an underground tunnel, and is really crowded with people. And suddenly these two dogs streak past us on the way, acting like they had an appointment to make. And so we're who are these dogs and where are they going? It almost felt like an Alice in Wonderland moment where you're chasing the rabbit. So we followed what would become Zeytin and Nazar, and they were on the heels of the boys from Syria. And so watching sort of the relationship the on and off again relationship they had with this group of young men was really moving, and how they found home in each other and a sort of a makeshift family unit on the streets. And then Zeytin became our star. And one of the things I have to say about Zeytin is she is one of the only dogs that didn't end up inadvertently following us back as the film crew. And so she really embodied that sort of radical independence of existing outside of sort of our human will. And that's why she sort of embodies the spirit of the film.
That's interesting. I'd wondered if you had sort of been planning the sort of Syrian refugee side of the story at the same time, and that was just sort of an accidental, coincidence at that place.
Yeah,
Interesting.
Yeah. And obviously, I think that relationship drew us also to Zeytin, because I think stray dogs tend to have like a certain geographical vicinity that they call home within a city, but Zeytin's was really wide-ranging, partly I think because she would follow these boys to wherever they were going in the city. Yeah.
And so that brings me to the next logical question is, how did you possibly find her all the time and follow her? And how did that, I mean, was it just you? What was your crew like to be able to, like if it's you and you're just kind of like, okay, I'll find her this day or I won't, but if you've got lots of people waiting on her, you can't get her to respond. So like, how do you find her? Did you track her? What was the situation?
Yeah, totally. At first our crew size was like 4 people. And then, but slowly we realized like we're following stray dogs. They spend a lot of their time sleeping and, they don't have a schedule. So it ended up, most of the film crew ended up always being 2 people, me and a co-producer from Turkey who understood Turkish and recorded sounds, which end up being a part of the film. And in terms of how we found them again, we got these GPS pet trackers that every day at the end of shooting, we would put on them. And then so we'd go to sleep and we'd be able to see where they wandered throughout the night. And then we'd wake up and then I'd, take off the collars off of them. But I actually went back for a pickup shoot with Zeytin a year and a half later, because after cutting the film, I realized we needed some scenes, and I also wanted to see, how has her life changed, and it hadn't changed that much at all, which is remarkable that a stray dog can survive and thrive in a city that's as huge as Istanbul. And so when I went back a year and a half later, everyone was like, you're not going to be able to find a single stray dog in this huge city, but miraculously we were able to find her because I knew the spots where she hung out.
What were there any surprises for the spots that she hung out? Like, did she have like a secret life with a family somewhere, or a secret life with another, the shopkeeper anywhere else? Like, were there typical places that she would go?
Yeah, I mean, the second time I went back basically alone, and didn't have any sort of co-producers with me, because I didn't want to subject them to like date. Because this time I went back, I was like, okay, I really want to embed with Zeytin and not leave her side barely, just day and night be with her. And it was so interesting to see like the butcher shops. It felt almost like a cartoon. She would like go to the butcher shop and he'd like hand him a few pieces of meat. She'd go to like a alleyway and find like an entire sausage. And so that really, it made me realize how much food she was getting and finding on her own, and that people were providing to her. And so it made me realize in the early days when I was trying to produce the shoot a little bit more and like control what we were able to film, I would try to bribe her with like food, and she would never respond. Like, it's because her own diet was so rich. There was nothing we could give her that was richer than that. But I also love that because the film really is sort of let loose to the dog's whims. Like, we tried to exert our control,
right,
but we couldn't. And I love that about it.
Well, and the other aspect too is obviously that you really put the viewer in the perspective of the dog. It's like typically filmed kind of street level, not always, but often street level, dog eye level, as I should say. Can you talk about sort of that decision and sort of how you approach that part of your storytelling?
Yeah, I think that was really important for me, that the cinematography feel embodied at the dog's eye level, because I feel like viscerally and on a subconscious level, you're literally and thematically challenging conventional modes of seeing. Like, a big part of this film, the impetus is to sort of take down the destructive anthropocentrism that defines how we see the world and how we manage our planet. And this film is like a small attempt at sort of orally through sound design and visually trying to recenter the world through a non-human gaze.
And you brought it up a couple times now, but the sound is really remarkable in the film. It's not a lot of music, but it's a lot of the soundscape of the city. And can you talk about how you worked to develop that aspect of the film?
Yeah, before going out, I knew sort of like the dream sound designer I could work with would be Ernst Carroll, who had worked on films like Leviathan and Sweetgrass, very non-human centric films. And he sort of lent us this like bi-directional microphone that would be able to pick up sounds from all over in the production. And then in post, one of the things we were trying to figure out is like, how do you try to convey dog mind? Sort of, you know, paying attention to conversations, yet not quite, because they're not that invested in the human dramas we have about marriage or Instagram or politics. And so with Ernst, we worked on figuring out a way where I think, you know, the frequencies are higher in certain places, much higher than normal human hearing would hear. And then human voices are distorted and kind of secondary to the dog's senses. So that was how we were trying to convey, you know, just what it might sound like to be a dog. But although of course it is not able to fully capture that, but at least to place you in a defamiliarized soundscape.
For sure. A scene that really sticks out is, it's a brief one, but it's Zaytin like crossing traffic. And sort of, you know, I'm sure dog lovers, animal lovers watching this will be like, like what, like, be careful. Like, did you have moments where you had to sort of step in and kind of help? And was that ever any part of your experience during the shoot?
Yeah. I mean, with the crossing of the traffic, I mean, as a filmmaker and a cinematographer, you're constantly weighing and taking calculated risks.
Right.
And so like when she decides to cross the street, I think I was in the mindset that, look, she's survived this long. She knows what she's doing, and I'm going to trust her even with my own life. Like I would just go into the street with her, even as cars were coming. Figuring that she knew what she was doing in terms of traffic and speed of cars, and it was always fine. Like she made the right judgments. And there's even this moment when she's like she's sitting in the traffic, in the middle of traffic, and there's all these cars passing by her, and I'm thinking like, what is going through her head as she's doing this? Even though I'm like thrilled as a cinematographer, I'm like, oh, this scene captures sort of the precarity of life and also us not fully understanding non-human logic. But then I realized in post-production, actually, that she kind of looks back at me in the footage, and I kind of realized she maybe could sense and channel sort of my desires as a cinematographer and put herself in this position, a calculated risk she was taking almost to fulfill my subconscious desires that I didn't think I was expressing. And so it's just amazing to me how sensitive she was to my desires. Like when I was annoyed with people, I was trying to hide it, she would be able to tell and she would react. And sometimes she's like, it's barking. There's scenes where she's barking at the camera, but she's actually barking at people like sort of on my side, bothering me. So, and I feel like a lot of times she was protecting me. There was one time when Nazar, the other dog, and it's not in the film, actually does catch a cat and is like shaking it. And at that point I stepped in. I was like, what? You know, I didn't think she would actually be able to catch this cat. And then other people stepped in. So there are moments when I made an ethical calculation. Like, I don't care if I lose this scene. Like, I'm not going to let this dog kill this cat in front of me.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm a cat person myself. But it's funny what you just said about, you know, you sort of thinking she's sort of wondering and protecting you and thinking about you, because I was going to ask sort of like, how would you characterize the bond that you formed with her and the other strays? Given that you said earlier, like she wouldn't follow you back, like she maintains her independence, but sort of how do you feel about sort of your relationship to her and to the other dogs at this point?
It's the kind of love and affection and appreciation you can have with a being who's totally not dependent on you. And I think that's really rare and beautiful. She's a stranger who came into my life, and I got to know her, she got to know me. But anytime she was with me, I knew that it was purely because she happened to be interested in me at that time, because just as quickly she would zoom off to go and do her own thing, or, you know, attach herself to another group of people. And you know, at the end of the night, sometimes she would walk me back to the hostel I was staying in. And then the next morning I'd come out and she was gone. And yeah, I love that relationship. I wish that we could have that in our lives and in societies that have purged and eradicated stray dogs from our lives. Like, unless you own a dog, you kind of don't have that daily kind of friendships with other non-human beings. And I think that's a real loss to our society, to have this
Right.
kind of like no strings attached, communally raised love of being sentient beings who've evolved to like get along with us
Right.
and too in the city.
Yeah, I mean, it's so striking how different the setup is there. I've been to Thessaloniki in Greece, where the same situation, kind of dogs are running around and they're kind of just communal in a way. So it is curious to see that and look out your window in New York and be like, no, there's nothing like that here.
Yeah.
So I think that is really fascinating.
Yeah.
Please, yeah.
Nothing. I was just going to say, like, I think in the West, we tend to think of societies that have stray populations as being inhumane or irresponsible, but it's completely, I've realized the reverse. Like, we incarcerate and euthanize all the dogs that don't happen to have owners, and that's actually insanity, but we've morally reframed it to be the superior mode of being.
Yeah. I have one last question for you before we have to wrap up, which is, do you have any way now of keeping tabs on what's going on with both the dogs and with the boys, if you have any updates? Are there locals who are keeping tabs on them that you're in touch with? Like, can you talk a little bit about like what their experience of the pandemic has been like, anything like that? Are they okay?
Yeah. When the pandemic started, I was very concerned because I was like, oh, how are people who live on the streets, and also the dogs who live on the streets, how are they making a living through food in the way that they used to? And my Turkish co-producer, Zeynep Kopperlu, who lives in Istanbul, just a few weeks ago, she actually sent me a picture she took of Zeytin just laying on the street in Taksim Square and unable to wake up, or she tried to wake her up and she wouldn't wake up. She's living life as usual, I think. And I've read articles, and Zeynep has also told me about how, like, despite the pandemic and despite the lockdown that had occurred earlier, people, residents, and the government are still putting out food for all the dogs. And in terms of like the boys, I haven't been able to communicate with them because they don't have cell phones. But the last I heard, I think Zeynep had sort of encountered them, just as she's going about her day, and their lives are pretty much the same. But some of them is pretty much the same. And that's, it's really sad because they're still living on the streets. There's not that much infrastructure, but each year goes by and it's the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I'm glad you do have a way of kind of tracking some of what's going on there. So that's good to have that update. But with that, we do have to wrap up. But I want to thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you, and I'm so happy that we were able to include Stray in Doc NYC. Thank you again, Elizabeth Lowe, for having the film at Doc NYC.
Thank you so much, Basil. It's such an honor to be a part of Doc NYC.